like this one, and I didn't. Hey, Twisted people, it's your Twisted Girl here, Chauncey K. Robinson, aka Twisted CKR, and today I am reviewing the horror picture found footage somehow Skinamarink. Yes, Skinamarink. Really was interested in this movie because, word of mouth, you hear the buzz around it, and people are saying this is the most terrifying thing ever. So I didn't necessarily go in there with the bar like super, super high, but I definitely went in there expecting some scares. Didn't really get that. And we're going to get into why. Skinamarink is a movie that deals with seemingly two young children who are experiencing a really crazy night in their home where things are changing, stuff's going upside down. The parents are like MIA, and there's something in the darkness. And this is a movie that I think plays a lot on the fears that many of us have had as children of what goes bump in the night. Heck, what many of us have as a fear as adults of what goes bump in the night and under our bed and in the closet and things like that. This movie I felt had a lot of potential, and unfortunately, the execution fell really long and flat. Skinamarink feels unnecessarily vague, super, super vague, and unnecessarily long. Like, way longer than the idea of this film needed to be. I will give it the pro, right? The pro of this film is the atmosphere. It's creepy. The way it's filmed, in some aspects. I'll also talk about the way it's filmed in a negative aspect. But in certain cases, the grainy film, the feeling of this being something that happened in the past, the early 90s or whatnot, and how film looked back then and everything. It does create an atmosphere that is very creepy. Once again, playing on childhood fears of the lights going off and you laying in your bed and your parents aren't there or your loved ones, and you're just kind of there with yourself in the darkness. And when you're young, it can be very scary because you have a very active imagination, and who knows what that can come up with. Not to mention when that active imagination turns out to be very, very true in the sense of there might be something in the dark trying to hurt you. But unfortunately, for me, that is where a lot of the positives for this film ends. This is a movie where a lot of nothing happens. And I get it. It's found footage, supposedly. I'm going to talk about that in a second. It's found footage and it's weirdly angled and everything. So because of that, it plays more on the idea that I feel like the Blair Witch did when it first came out and other found footage type movies, that there's something very real about this. And when a movie is playing on the idea that it's reality or that this could be something that actually happened, I do believe that you aren't supposed to have it so that it's scare after scare after scare, because then it feels kind of fake in that regard, right? So you want it to be that maybe stuff is spaced out, it's not happening so quickly, there's more of a buildup of the fear to the ultimate, like maybe last 10 minutes where there's a lot going on. And so I gave the movie enough space to do that. I didn't go in saying, when is something going to happen? But it became very clear as the movie went on that as much of a buildup that was happening, and as much as, or a lack thereof of a buildup that was happening, that even if something did happen in the last 5 or so minutes, there was no way that was going to justify all the minutes, all the minutes leading up to that final 5 or 10 minutes that would be the climax of the movie itself. I'm also questioning how this is really a found footage movie. I see a lot of people saying this is changing the game for found footage. I don't really think it's doing that, because I don't think this should count as a found footage film. Found footage is literally supposed to be film that supposedly was found, right? In the regard of someone filmed it and then, like, on a camcorder or a phone, and then you somehow found it later and you're watching it on the big screen or your own home, right? That's usually how found footage works, as in it was lost at one time. Now, the way I feel about Skinamarink is, and maybe this is just me, I'll admit maybe it's me nitpicking just a little bit, is that what has it as found footage is the grainy photo, the fact that for whatever reason, a lot of it is filmed where you cannot see anything above the feet of the kids. Uh, it's very angled in a very, like, a way that's just like you can't really see the full thing. And I would okay that of being found footage if there was some explanation of, oh, I don't know, like the parents had cameras in the house and things like that in certain areas and whatnot. But that's not really how this movie is filmed. This movie is filmed in a way where there are times when you see things through the eyes of the kids. Then there are times when you see the film not through the eyes of the kids, but at a weird angle where you can only see feet and like pieces of the room. In that regard, I would call this something of a surrealist sort of filming, but I wouldn't necessarily call that found footage. I don't think it's exactly found footage per se. So if you're going into this thinking you're getting like a found footage thing, I don't think you're really getting that. I think you're getting it in terms of aesthetic somewhat, if the kids had cameras on their foreheads or something. But in terms of it actually technically being a found footage movie, I don't really think it counts as one. And that kind of, I don't know, it didn't annoy me, but I was like, stop calling this a found footage film. Also, the main characters in this film are the kids. And I understand that because of the fact of it plays on childhood nightmares and fears. With that said, though, I think because of this, because it's so from the viewpoint of very young children at that. Like these kids are, I'm talking baby talk young and whatnot. And I think because of that, it's very hard to form a connection with our main characters. They're children. They're like real. I'm not talking about 12-year-old wisecracking, maybe watches a bit more TikTok so they got some ideas kind of kids. I'm talking like 4 years old. And I think it's very hard to watch a movie for longer than a short of like 12 minutes to maybe 30 minutes where your only dialogue, your only introspection or lack thereof is from toddlers. And so I think there's a reason why pictures, horror pictures, or films in general, they do kind of get the perspective. You usually have to be a little bit older of a character for people to feel that emotional connection. I cared for the kids and the fact that you would care for any kids that are in peril, but in terms of wanting to follow their story bit by bit for all the minutes that this movie ran, I found myself not as engaged. And also, because you care for the kids, there's some things that happen to the kids in this film that is really disturbing. And perhaps that's why some people found it very creepy, because it went there in terms of the things or the violence that can happen. But I actually also found that unnecessary, to be honest. I felt that was unnecessary. I just thought, okay, is that what we were waiting for? And even with it being as long as it is, there's not nearly enough scares in this film. I just thought there were perhaps maybe 2 to 3 very creepy moments. There are some creepy moments and some WTF moments of what's going on. But aside from that, it was just kind of like, okay. And if you're going to have a movie that is this long, you either need to build it up with the characters, which it can't do because the characters are like under 6 years old, or you make it so there's more creepiness going on throughout, and there was more of just kind of confusing things. And listen, I consider myself a smart person. I'm not saying I'm the smartest person ever. I'm not saying that I always get things. There are times when I've watched movies where I've missed stuff, right? Something's gone over my head. I had to re-look at it. I had to kind of take a little bit of a second look to kind of be like, oh, that's what that was. And now this scene makes a lot more sense and I can appreciate it more. I've totally had that experience with films because you got to leave yourself open to that, to the fact that maybe you missed something as the viewer, and it's not always the shortcoming of the storyteller. In this case, when it comes to SKINAMARINK, I do think it's the shortcoming of the storyteller, because aside from this being a very surrealist horror picture, which it is. So you should expect that a lot of things are not going to make sense. You're not going to be understanding whether or not you're in a reality or something else, and it's never truly explained. You aren't completely satisfied. And while I am not someone who thinks that you always have to lay it all out there for me, I do think you have to give the viewers enough breadcrumbs that they can make a few theories that don't feel like they're just pulled out of thin air. And I feel like with this movie, although there are theories as to what was really happening in the film, a lot of them aren't really supported by much evidence because not much evidence is actually given in this movie. My overall grade for Skinamarink is a D. I honestly can't recommend this film for someone. I mean, I never will tell you not to watch it. If you are curious, give it a look. But for me, this movie just was not, it's not something I think you need to run to the theater to see. I don't even think you need to run to your couch to see it. So let me know if you watched Skinamarink. Did you like it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Do you think it's actually a found footage movie? Or do you think it is miscategorized like I think? Let me know. Comment down below and stay twisted out there.